Hey guys, and welcome back. So if you didn't see my previous video on how genius I thought the debate format was for the first presidential debate for the 2022 South Korean presidential election, check that video out because I've never seen this format, and I definitely think that that format was born out of necessity for people just trying to cover their butts, but it actually created a really welcome innovation. So there were 4 different categories that they debated about, and I just wanted to focus on one of them for this video, and that is the real estate policy. And that was the first thing they talked about because it's basically the biggest thing on people's minds. So real estate, like all assets, they just kind of ran up really high. If you want to be in Seoul, you basically got to have $1 million or $2 million just to have a normal apartment. Now, normal being like, well, if you didn't see the video on the building collapse about like them building like actually one of the fancy brand apartments and that's collapsing. So when I'm saying normal is basically an apartment that is made by a big builder, sort of like the one that did collapse, but that you can kind of bank on. Don't want to get too much into it, but there are cheaper options. It's just that people don't trust the build quality and the investment potential doesn't go up. And there are a lot of problems with like maintenance on them, and there's even a lot of discrimination. So if like your kid doesn't live in the apartment building of that school district neighborhood or that school's neighborhood, and if they live in kind of like one of they call it a villa, then they might not even get friends. I mean, that's how serious it is. So that's the pressure of people trying to live in these standardized apartments. But when people come to Korea, they're just like, why does everybody want to live in those? And when I first came to Korea, I thought, because they said like, oh, you're going to be in the rich area. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then they're like, oh, here it is. And I was just like, oh, the rich area is right next to the slums. And I'm like, but where's the rich area? Well, it turns out those apartment blocks that I thought looked like housing projects were the ones that were like $1 million, $2 million, because they're really old apartments, but they're in a good neighborhood. And what they're pricing in right now is the tear down, and eventually there's going to be a new build there. So that's why it's really expensive. And then also apparently people on the inside, the interior is nice, even though the outside looks like a decaying like 1960s German housing project. But anyhow, so real estate, very high. The biggest problem that comes up now is just that this voter bloc, finally, people in their 20s and 30s, I think if you look at the population, there's been so much emphasis on trying to capture their vote because they're a swing vote and they will basically tip the election, because now there's enough of the 20s and 30s crowd that actually they will pay attention to. Before they're just like, we don't care about you young people, we're going to take care of us. And so it's very interesting. So now the debate has been mainly framed more in terms of like, how do you get younger people on the housing ladder to try to get them into home ownership? It's not like they're trying to force people into home ownership. People want to be in it. It's just that now they're just priced out of the market. It's impossible. Yoon got to start off, and he tried to make his question first into an attack about the housing development project that's under all of the corruption investigations right now that involves the leading liberal candidate, Lee Jae-myung, while he was mayor of Seongnam. And so Yoon attacked Lee under the guise of the real estate policy to ask about the real estate development project called Daejang-dong. Daejang is the neighborhood's name. But Lee just like, Lee Jae-myung was just like trying to make himself look like the persecuted martyr and be like, we are resolving all those questions, or those questions have been resolved. And I don't think it's time for us to waste our precious dialogue with the citizens by talking about that. We should talk about how we're going to improve the housing situation, especially for the young people. I told you this guy is a performer, but now I think the performance is kind of getting thin. I don't think it's not landing as true as it was before, and it looks a bit kind of like totally like now he's, doing the political gibberish, but I will say he still gets an A for the performance. Now, Yoon, he is not adept at people disrespecting him like this. Like, this is also why I don't think a prosecutor makes a good president, because they're probably so used to being sucked up to that when Lee Jae-myung, like everybody was like doing, like, there's the, like the whole mean girl dig where like, you're kind of like, like you're just like insulting through a smile. Well, Yoon is not really used to that. So you could tell like he gets really uncomfortable, but he's used to being like, well, I can attack you and say whatever I want because I'm the alpha male, even though his wife calls him a woman. And he's like attacking, and then he expects like maybe Lee Jae-myung to kind of like be like kind of like hit by that and like kind of weakened, but no, Lee Jae-myung will just take that and shoot it right back at you. And you can tell like Yoon was kind of like uncomfortable, just kind of like, well, how can you talk to me like this? And like, what is, and that is horrible body language because it makes him look extremely weak when he probably thinks he looks so alpha strong. He don't. But then at the same time, he's a big old crocodile. And so E came back and was basically saying like, I'm never profiting from all these things, but didn't your daddy buy you your apartment? Like that's a profit that you should take responsibility for. And so like it's kind of like, whoosh, mean girls. So then An Chul-soo went after Lee Jae-myung as well, and he said like, okay, Mr. Lee Jae-myung, and An Chul-soo, as I alluded to before in a previous video, took a Socratic method. He would ask questions that needed a response from the person he's asking, and he's doing it to try to trap them. And so first of all, he's like, so are you going to be the successor to the Moon administration? And Lee Jae-myung was like, because he was trying to put him in an uncomfortable spot about like Lee Jae-myung has to be loyal to Moon Jae-in because they're in the same party, and like he's getting support for being he is the next successor if he wins. But then he also has to differentiate because the Moon administration has been so unpopular, and then also he has to make his own name. And so he was like, oh no, well, I am just trying to create a new Lee Jae-myung administration. And then An Chul-soo was like, so he's not fazed by this because, he knows that he's dealing with some crocodile and he's probably dealt with vendors worse than him. And so he's just like, so then how would you grade Moon Jae-in's real estate policy? And he's like, well, not good. I have to apologize for that. And then An Chul-soo asked, then what would you say is the main reason for the soaring prices in real estate? And then Lee Jae-myung just seemed to be like, what the heck? He's like looking at the moderator, looking at the production people, kind of like, what is going on here? Why am I like, feeling like I'm losing here? Like as if he kind of rigged it. Did he rig it? Does he have the problem? They're all probably working their back channels to basically be like, you're my friend, make sure like I look good. But so he had to answer this, and this is why An Chul-soo, like, despite however many friends you may have behind the camera, you gotta answer it because you're in front of it. And so he said like, well, I think there's a mismatch between supply and demand. And he said in particular, it's the people who own multiple properties and are renting them out like a business. So he's definitely taking that kind of populist stance that the Democratic Party has been taking and has punitively legislated against. If you're a multiple homeowner just trying to make a living by fixing up apartments and then renting them out, this administration has completely overtaxed you because they wanted you to sell. They wanted to force you to sell so that you're only left with one house. Anyhow, so he maintained that line, and he basically, later on, to make the long story short, Lee Jae-myung is about increasing supply, because this guy likes to create development projects so that, just like the one that's being investigated for corruption right now, it opens up opportunity, limitless political corruption opportunity. And as we've seen, there's mechanisms to do that extremely well, to extract profits out and then even build more of your financial and political capital as a shady politician. So Shin Jung, the female presidential candidate, said to Yoon that, you also believe that increasing supply will be the answer to the housing crisis, but she attacked him because she also knew, like what we all know, is that Yoon doesn't really do his homework and doesn't double check whether his ideas, where the numbers actually pan out to anything. And she's like, look, we had the biggest increase in supply with the Moon Jae-in administration, but we had like the biggest soaring prices we have ever seen. So just the factor of increasing nationwide supply does not make a difference. And then Yoon was saying like, well, the nationwide numbers aren't important because, we're really looking at where the real the demand is, and the demand is in the capital, in Seoul, which, Shin Jung is definitely also on board with. She wants to increase like public housing supply in Seoul. And Yoon also wants to increase supply as a mixture of public housing and just, regular private developments. And Yoon was just kind of like making all this gibberish with like what he thought was like his understanding of economics. He's like, well, with houses, like it's not a regular commodity because like if the price goes down, like it's not necessarily like the demand goes up, but then when the prices seem like to be going up, then there's more demand. So I mean, he just really don't understand supply and demand, or in this case, like it is a bit complex, but I don't think he can handle it. Basically, it didn't really look like he knew what he was doing. So Ahn Cheol-soo really took it upon himself to kind of like zero in on that, and he used his time as basically just asking Yoon Suk-yeol the question. Is like, okay, well, let's go through your pledges to the younger generation in their 20s and 30s. You said you would give them 5 extra points to help them get pre-development construction units, and in particular, the men who had to serve their mandatory military service, because it's about 1.5 years. It takes you out of the job market. So it seems as if like there is a perception that, this is very like horrible. Like in my, youth and my young career, like it kind of throws a wrench in everything. And so Yoon Suk-yeol said, okay, we're going to give you 5 more points in our point system. And this point system, as I alluded to in a previous video, is essentially your way to get ahead in the line for pre-construction units. So like the one that fell down, that was pre-construction. And who bought it? If it's a popular building in a popular area, it's been 100% sold before they even started building it. You go in and see a model house, like in some sales office. And then how do they then, if there's more people who want to buy it than there are units, then how do they dole it out? Well, basically, you have this system where like you create a bank account that is designed for the purpose of buying your first house, and you deposit money in it over the years. But now the money has become meaningless, because I think you can only deposit up to like $10,000 or something. So that gets you up to a certain level of points. Like whether you're married or if you have kids, that gets you points. So it's definitely way biased towards like people who are already have developed their nuclear traditional family. There is a total number of points that is the highest number, and that is 84. But Ahn Cheol-soo was like, so Yoon Suk-yeol, do you know what the highest number is? And he's like, yeah, it's like 40. And then Ahn Cheol-soo was like, yeah, that's correct, it's 84. And then Yoon Suk-yeol was like, oh yeah, I meant 84. And then he said like, well, out of 84, the most you can get as a family of 3, like 2 adults and 1 child, is 64 points. And he said, well, that means that somebody in their 30s who wants to get the full score to be ahead of the line in this pre-construction sale needs to have 64 points, and they have to have started their bank account that is for this purpose in their 20s and start building up points then. Also, the big reason is that you get it at the base floor price. Like, unless the market really does something weird, or if it's like a bad construction unit, like you'll never see that price at that low level ever again. It'll go up. Sometimes, like while it's being constructed, it might take like anywhere between like 1.5 to 3 years. The price can go up and you can sell your basically spot of, you know, buying it to somebody else even during the process. But there, in this past few years in this crazy real estate market, you can double your money basically almost immediately, where you buy it at the pre-construction price, and then by the time you move in, the price has doubled. That's how like crazy like the real estate market had been. But basically you're saying like, okay, but then do you know how many points you need to be at the bare minimum to qualify for one of these apartments in Seoul? And it's only like 24 square units, so it's like a smaller unit. And then Yoon was like, oh yeah, probably, you know, like the full amount. And he's like, yeah, 62.2. So 62.2 you need, or otherwise you can't even look at the model house. And the highest number for that family of 3 is 64. So dude, your 5 points, it doesn't make a difference. For somebody who probably has like 30 points, 35 points, not gonna make it, because they would need like 30 points. If you're at like 62 already, then the highest number is 64, so your 5 extra points not gonna do much. And so like saying like your policy literally is meaningless and worthless. And then Yoon was like, oh well, you know, like I meant that it was just all about a national security kind of decision I was making at that point to benefit the people who serve the military. I wasn't really thinking about real estate at that point. Then what's the point? Like, you know, you might as well give them a cookie on their way out. I mean, like, they would be able to like enjoy that. Then he got attacked again by Shin Jung, who was talking about taxes. Oh, she went for a 2-for-1, taxes, and then also Yoon's policy of trying to give low interest rate loans to young homeowners. So she said like, well, first of all, she's like, look, you're saying that people who are in $2.5 million houses, it is such a imposition on them to pay $500 a year in taxes, so you want to get rid of it. And Yoon was like, oh, well, you know, it's not just that tax, it's also asset, you know, taxes. So he just wanted to eliminate like the smaller one. But she was basically saying like, look, shouldn't we focus on these young renters who are having to shell out $700, $800 a month, not a year, on this rent that goes nowhere for this tiny, tiny room? And shouldn't we try to give them more opportunities? Yoon's campaign pledge was essentially being able to give a low interest loan for 20 years and to allow only up to like a 20% down payment. See, in Korea, you usually have to have about 40 to 60% down payment. That's what makes it really tough. It's, you know, that's why people are so depressed. You know, in America, like, you know, there's like that 10% down, 20% down if you really want to just kind of get a good rate. But, you know, during that whole like crazy mortgage crisis, there was like 0% down. Well, in Korea, if you only put 20% down, that is being extremely like loose with the mortgage policy. And so we really don't see anything. We don't see 20% down hardly ever. Like you have to come up with at least 40%. If it's a high speculation zone, like it could be 50 or 60%. And so he's like, well, you know, I want to give them a chance to like only put 20% down and have like a low interest rate loan. And she's like, well, but you do know that even if they are able to do that, they would end up paying about 2.5 million won a month, or about $2,500 a month. And in Korea, that is a lot. And so she's like, that would only go for rich kids then, right? And he's like, well, you know, like, you know, not everybody can live in Seoul or like in the capital. And so like, he was like, oh, I was referring to people not living in the capital, where like the price of the houses would be cheaper. You know, once you get out of Seoul, like it's a lot cheaper to buy real estate. And so he's like, you know, so that's different. But then Shim Sang-jung, her main priority is essentially like, look, most young people, they're in the capital, they're overpaying, they're struggling, they'll never be able to buy a house. We got to fix this crisis in the capital. So she's very focused on the capital. And then Lee Jae-myung, capital. So, you know, people are attacking Yoon again on like his knowledge. And then he's like, well, you know, did you ever think about like the whole like DSR, DTI, or like, you know, basically it's like debt to income, like, you know, it's basically kind of like your credit score. Like, are you going to adjust the requirements for your credit so that more young people can qualify? Because, you know, young people have fewer assets, they have lower income. So even if you have this program where you have a low interest loan, and even in 20 years in Korea is actually kind of considered long, even though, you know, in America it's like a 30-year minimum. So he's like, even if you have this generous loan policy, they won't be able to qualify under the current ways that it's calculated based on your income, and incomes in Korea are a lot lower. So then Yoon Suk-yeol was just like, well, you know, I didn't really think about the DTI, DSR. I think I would have to like, you know, look that up and get back to you. So again, he kind of like made like this plan, didn't even think about the whole thing, and you should have seen the look on Lee Jae-myung's face. Was like, what the heck am I doing on the same stage with somebody who don't know anything? So then Shim Sang-jung was like then harping on public housing issue with Lee Jae-myung. She said, I had no idea you agreed with me that we have to increase public housing. I wouldn't have known that because you ain't never built a public housing unit while you were governor or the mayor. And so she totally made a dig on him. And she even brought up Daejang-dong again. And he was like, well, that's not for me to decide because that's a federal issue, national issue, not like on a local issue. I don't know if that's true or not. But then basically they had this debate over like, you know, whether it should be like 1 to 2% of the units be public housing or 10%. So Shim Sang-jung wants as much as she can to use the public budget that's in the housing ministry to support public housing development, especially in the capital. But what I did not like about her is that she basically is saying like, look, we need to end once and for all the ability for people to make money from real estate investment. And so, you know, in that way, I think she should also take another look at an economics textbook, because that also is a half-baked way of creating a policy. Because I'll tell you what, every single young person who feels priced out of the market, can never buy a home but wants to buy a home, once they buy a home, they want to make money from it. They want to see the value go up. They want to feel the security of that investment. And so she's basically saying like, we need to return to all of these high taxation schemes to try to like prevent the housing sector from becoming like an integral part of the economy. I'm just like, girl, then you're going to have to really then figure out the social safety net system, because the housing market has been a savior for lawmakers like you, where you don't have to worry about like the way, you know, in America, they worry about social security policy and how to keep that program going. In Korea, way lower. It's almost like nothing. Like, I don't know, I think it's like $100 or $200 a month that people can get from like that social safety system when you're a senior, because people are relying on their investments, and because that stock market here in Korea is way too manipulatable and people don't trust it, and then interest rates are way too low on just deposit accounts, people have been banking on their real estate investments as their retirement program. And that has been a way to essentially privatize a retirement program where the government doesn't have to get involved in it. And so you should be thanking the real estate market for doing your job and taking the load off of your shoulders, and now you want to destroy it? Doesn't make any sense. What did make sense? This, I thought, was the best idea out of the entire section of the debate, and it came from An Chol-soo. And I thought that he had the most realistic solution to this market-based problem, because he said the biggest issue with the way that real estate has been legislated under this administration under Moon Jae-in is this hubris that these people have, that they can control the real estate market in whatever format they want, and mislabeling and putting a stigma on home ownership as property speculation. Most people, they just want one house, maybe two houses. And people like Shin Jung, and then also people in the Moon administration, are like, no, everybody should only have one house or no house. And it's all property speculation. Whereas An Chol-soo is saying, like, that is not the best approach, because you cannot control the market like that. Otherwise, you're going to get disastrous North Korean results, which we are getting. And that you can't call all these people just trying to do what they're trying to do to secure their financial future as property speculators. And so he said that, okay, for the young people, then why don't we extend out the mortgage term and give them low interest rate, like about 2%. Same thing where, like, okay, we'll give you like a 20% down payment. So here, he already solved the problem that, Lee Jae-myung was complaining about, and Yoon Suk-yeol, like, how they were debating each other. He said, look, let them come up with 20%, which is still a lot. Let them come up with 20%, give them a loan on the 80%, but instead of like 20 years, or even like America 30 years, stretch it out to 45 years, make the initial years while they're still making like little money and building up their equity, to have it just be like an interest-only type of payment system, and let them get into the home ownership ladder in that way. And I was just like, that makes a lot of sense for, like, if you need a solution right now to solve affordability to get in, but then not rattle the property market by trying to manipulate the supply and prices. The demand is there. And so, like, people who have property, they don't want to see like a housing crash just because like you feel like suddenly people should only have one house. And then also, that's not even fully thought out, because if you want to have new property development, is the government going to pay for every single new property? You need to have investors, and investors come from the ordinary people. And especially if you don't even have a house, you want to buy your first house, you suddenly become an investor. And so you are shouldering the risk of that. The government doesn't have to shoulder the risk for that. This property developer doesn't have to shoulder risk for that. It's all shared under this capitalistic model that, if it works well without manipulation, could be more of a functioning market. And so that, I think, is just like ridiculous, of how like some people are saying like, oh, well, we should limit to only one. So then how are you going to increase supply that way? How are you going to get people's capital into the market that way? It's going to go off into weird places. Like, people are going to be starting investing in like underground casinos or something. Let them invest in property. Let them invest in the development and the infrastructure of Korea. It'll look better. I mean, people, when they do see some of the new apartments and when they come visit Korea, they're just like, dang, looks good. Dang, looks good. I'm like, yeah, because that's the only place that people trust their investment. They don't really like the stock market. They don't like the bank. Small businesses not doing well, so that they want to put it into infrastructure. And so I thought that made sense. Like, I don't know if it's really good to make like a 45-year mortgage. That's like really long, but at the same time, like, they can pay it off quicker if they wanted to. At 2%, like, they control, as the president, the fiat currency, if they can actually have access to cheaper capital that they can give to this population to spur development and growth in that area. That makes a lot of sense, and it's a lot less heavy-handed than a punitive law trying to get people to sell their houses, or the heavy hand of just like really favoring, like in a plutocracy, like certain corporations and giving them all the benefits. It's essentially a very clean and transparent, fair, market-based solution, which I thought was quite smart. So kudos to you, Mr. Antarsu. I think you won the debate in this category, and I think your idea is instantly implementable and will not shock the property market. Put your comments below, or if any kind of comments that you want about the presidential candidates or the way that the campaigns are going, or even real estate in Korea. Love to hear your thoughts. All right, guys, we'll see you again next time. Take care, like, share, and subscribe. Bye-bye.